What if I told you that much of what we believe about one of the universe's most enigmatic and feared entities, the ultimate antagonist, has been distorted through millennia? What if our very conception of the great adversary is but one facet of a grander, hidden narrative, a truth erased from the sacred texts we thought we knew so intimately? Across the most ancient texts, woven through Hebrew and Aramaic manuscripts, a question of cosmic weight has lingered. What is the true nature of Lucifer and Satan? The vast majority of us, without much thought, have accepted a singular assumption. They are one and the same, a unified title for the grand betrayer. But could this simplicity be masking a deeper complexity, a forgotten dimension of the fall itself? Take a breath, because what I am about to posit may challenge the very foundations of belief you've held. What if Lucifer was a name, a regal designation, a symbol of peak power and glory? And what if Satan was not a name at all, but a job title? A designation bestowed, or rather, a cosmic demotion enforced upon the very being who once shone so brightly. According to the texts, the deepest insights often reside in linguistic distinctions. Lucifer, as we know, stems from Latin, meaning light-bringer or morning star. It evokes an image of a magnificent entity, a jewel of creation, more brilliant than any star. But what of Ha-Satan in Hebrew? This term does not denote a fixed identity. It is a definite article, ha, and a verb root, Satan, meaning to oppose, to accuse, or to obstruct. It describes a role, a function, rather than a proper noun. This raises a fascinating question. Are we looking at two different individuals, or are we witnessing two entirely distinct phases in the career of the same great betrayer? One phase of supreme authority, pride, and rebellion, and another of diminishment, of demotion, where the role of the once king was reduced to that of the accuser. Let us delve into this. Let us explore the historical fissures through which a hidden truth might glimmer, that Lucifer, the proud king, was indeed demoted to Satan, the accuser. This is not merely a story of a fall, but of an identity shift, a fateful transformation that has been deliberately erased from our collective memory. We will trace the footsteps of this demotion together, layer by layer, peeling back the veil of assumptions and uncovering a truth that may shake the way you perceive the great cosmic war. This is the call to the depths, an invitation to join me on a journey to decode the buried mystery. Before we can fully grasp the implications of a demoted cosmic entity, we must first establish the grand stage upon which this drama unfolded. Our traditional understanding often confines these events to vague notions of heaven or spiritual realms. However, to truly appreciate the hidden demotion, we must envision a far more intricate and structured reality. Imagine, if you will, a cosmic empire of unparalleled order and majesty. This is not a chaotic void, but a meticulously organized dominion, stretching beyond the farthest reaches of our comprehension. Within this celestial framework, there were empires, vast hierarchical groupings of angelic hosts, each with specific functions and jurisdictions. These were not merely scattered beings, but intricate bureaucracies of divine purpose. Think of cities in the heavens, not as physical structures of brick and mortar, but as established realms of glory, focal points of activity and governance. These were the nerve centers, the great assemblies where cosmic decrees were pondered and divine plans set in motion. And just as earthly empires depend on the flow of commerce, so too did this celestial kingdom have its trade routes, not of material goods, but of worship, honor, and glory. This was the spiritual currency, the lifeblood that flowed back to the very heart of the throne, sustaining the cosmic balance. According to certain texts, the universe was a symphony of light, and light itself was the ultimate currency. Every act of worship, every moment of adoration was a deposit into this cosmic economy, empowering the system and maintaining its equilibrium. The laws of this dominion were not suggestions, but immutable principles, with worship not merely being a ritual, but the fundamental law of existence itself. It was the gravitational pull that held everything in its rightful place. Consider the intricate details in the book of Ezekiel, particularly chapters 28 and 31. While these passages are often interpreted as allegories for earthly kings, a deeper scholarly dive reveals language that transcends mere human monarchs. The descriptions speak of one who was in Eden, the garden of God, covered with every precious stone, and the anointed cherub who covers. These are not the adornments of a human king, but the regalia of a celestial potentate. This individual walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire, suggesting a position of immense proximity and authority within the very fabric of the divine government. This entity, referred to as the King of Tyre in allegory, held a position of profound honor and responsibility, presiding over what some scholars interpret as the inner sanctum of God's presence. This wasn't just a powerful angel, this was a being intricately woven into the very infrastructure of heaven itself, a key player in the cosmic government where light was traded and worship was law. This historical tapestry, rich with detail and hierarchy, sets the stage for the dramatic fall. It underscores that Lucifer's original position was not merely one of privilege, but of immense systemic importance. His eventual demotion, therefore, was not just a personal tragedy, but an event that sent shockwaves through the very cities and empires of this majestic, well-ordered celestial kingdom. The unraveling of such a magnificent thread would undoubtedly leave a gaping hole, demanding a profound restructuring of the cosmic order. Having established the grand, structured cosmic empire, we must now immerse ourselves in its original spiritual atmosphere, the very air breathed by these celestial beings before the first tremor of discord. This was not a silent, sterile void, but a vibrant, ceaseless symphony, a realm utterly saturated with divine presence and purpose. The heavens, we are often led to believe, are a place of quiet reverence. Yet, the ancient texts paint a picture of an eternal, dynamic soundscape. Imagine a celestial realm where the very act of being was an overture, a never-ending composition of praise, harmony, and light. The music of the spheres was not merely metaphorical, it was the intrinsic resonance of perfect alignment with the Creator's will. Within this atmosphere, the singular doctrine, the uncontested truth, was the absolute supremacy of the throne. There were no competing philosophies, no dissenting schools of thought, no room for individual interpretations that deviated from this core principle. The sovereignty of the Creator, was the gravitational force that held every atom of existence in perfect orbit. Every being, from the lowest cherub to the highest seraph, understood and upheld this fundamental truth. Here, worship was not a chore, a ritual, or an obligation. It was the very essence of existence. It wasn't something that could be corrupted because it was the natural outflow of who these beings were. Their creation was intrinsically linked to their purpose, to reflect the glory of the divine. To worship was to breathe, to exist, to fulfill their design. It was the purest expression of their being, untainted by doubt, pride, or self-interest. This was a world untouched by dissonance, unmarred by rebellion. There was no concept of sin, no shadow of rebellion, no whisper of discontent. The very fabric of this spiritual atmosphere was woven from absolute purity, unwavering devotion, and unblemished perfection. It was a realm where knowledge flowed freely, wisdom was abundant, and every interaction was imbued with divine love and purpose. Consider the implications of such an environment. In a place where perfection was the norm, where every desire was aligned with divine will, and where the purpose of existence was a harmonious outpouring of adoration, the very idea of rebellion would have been utterly foreign, an alien thought in a mind accustomed only to purity. This pristine atmosphere serves as the stark contrast to the unfolding drama. It emphasizes the profound magnitude of the coming fall. For an entity to deviate from this perfect alignment, to introduce discord into this eternal symphony, required a cataclysmic shift, not just in action, but in the very core of being. The spiritual atmosphere was not merely a backdrop. It was the very essence of the order that would soon be fractured, the harmony that would be shattered, and the light that would be dimmed by the shadow of a profound and unparalleled betrayal. Having painted the canvas of a pristine celestial empire, bathed in the symphony of perfect worship, we now turn our gaze inward to the quiet interior of the protagonist. Before the thunder of rebellion, before the name Lucifer became synonymous with defiance, he was a masterpiece, a being of exquisite design, adorned with every precious stone, filled with wisdom and perfect in beauty, as described in Ezekiel 28. He walked in Eden, the garden of God, among the fiery stones, an anointed cherub whose very presence overshadowed lesser celestial beings. But even within such unparalleled perfection, a subtle, almost imperceptible burden began to form, a weight unseen by any other. It was the crushing weight of his own flawless design, the burden of being the pinnacle of creation, second only to the Creator himself. He moved amongst the angelic hosts, a figure of radiant authority, yet within his heart, a quiet, insidious transformation was taking place. His heart, once a clear conduit for reflecting the divine glory, began to subtly warp into a mirror. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, he started to gaze upon his own reflection rather than the boundless majesty of his Creator. It was not an immediate, brazen act of rebellion, but a gradual, internal shift, a reorientation of the internal compass away from the magnetic north of the throne and towards the magnetic pull of self. This wasn't a sudden evil, but the insidious bloom of pride within the fertile ground of perfection. The very attributes that made him glorious, his wisdom, his beauty, his flawless design, began to serve as fuel for an internal fire that was not divinely kindled. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty, You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor, the text from Ezekiel 28:17 reveals. This isn't external temptation, it's an internal rot. He wasn't tempted by an outside force to betray. He was consumed by an internal glorification of self. The sheer perfection of his being, intended to magnify his Maker, became the very instrument of his downfall. He saw his own brilliance, and in that moment, the reflection outshone the source. The adulation that flowed through him from the lower orders, meant to be channeled upward, began to pool within his own being, creating a reservoir of self-importance. This internal fracturing, this subtle shift from reflection to self-admiration, was the genesis of the shadow in his heart. It was a silent, personal rebellion that preceded any outward act. He walked, he served, he shone, yet within, the seeds of dissonance were being sown. The spiritual atmosphere of perfect harmony, which we explored in the previous chapter, was about to meet its first internal challenge. Not from an external aggressor, but from the most magnificent being within its very core. The stage was set, not just for a fall, but for a profound, identity-shattering transformation born from the subtle corruption of an otherwise perfect heart. In the preceding chapter, we delved into the internal genesis of Lucifer's pride, the subtle shift within his heart that began to reorient his focus from the Creator to his own resplendent reflection. But for a rebellion to erupt, there must be an opposing force, a principle against which the nascent defiance can push. Intriguingly, Lucifer was not confronting a traditional enemy in the external sense. He was, in fact, squaring off against an unbreakable principle, the very foundational law of the throne. This principle was absolute. The law of the throne demanded that all glory, all worship, all honor must ultimately flow back to the center, to the Creator alone. It was the cosmic equivalent of gravity, an immutable law ensuring the stability and coherence of the entire celestial empire. This wasn't an arbitrary rule, but a necessity for the harmonious function of a universe built on divine sovereignty. Every celestial being was created to be a conduit, not a reservoir of glory. From Lucifer's evolving perspective, however, this very system, this unyielding law, began to morph into an oppressor. He, the most magnificent of all created beings, the seal of perfection, the anointed cherub who covers, found himself chafing under a system that demanded he merely channel, rather than accumulate, the adoration that naturally flowed towards him. The praise directed at his splendor, which he was meant to redirect, started to feel like his rightful due, a personal tribute. Consider the 5 "I will" statements recorded in Isaiah chapter 14, 13-14. I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. These are not passive desires. They are declarations of intent to usurp, to reroute the flow of glory, to re-establish the center of gravity around himself. He was not fighting against malevolence, but against the very nature of divine order. The system that ensured purity and sustained the universe's harmony became, in his warped perception, a tyrannical limitation on his burgeoning self-importance. The opposing force was the unyielding truth that only one could be ultimate, only one could receive unadulterated worship, and that was the Creator of all things. This internal conflict, pitting his magnificent self against the immovable principle of divine sovereignty, illuminates a critical aspect of his fall. It wasn't a clash of physical armies at this stage, but a profound theological and existential struggle within the celestial hierarchy. He wasn't battling an external adversary with malicious intent. He was battling the very framework that defined his existence and purpose. And it was this internal opposition, this rejection of the foundational law of the throne, that would ultimately transform Lucifer, the Lightbringer, into something far more sinister, setting the stage for his fateful whisper and the catastrophic journey that followed. The internal struggle, the subtle shift of the heart from reflection to self-admiration, and the growing resentment against the immutable law of the throne, all culminated in a singular, definitive moment. This was not a gradual erosion of loyalty, but a decisive declaration, a cosmic pronouncement of independence uttered in the silent chambers of his own being. This was the fateful whisper that sealed his destiny, forever altering the fabric of celestial harmony. The ancient text in Isaiah 14 provides a chilling glimpse into this precise turning point. It records not merely a thought, but a series of deliberate, defiant intentions, articulated as 5 resolute "I will" statements. These are not pleas or suggestions. They are the manifestos of a rebellion, a direct challenge to the very authority he once served with brilliance. I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Consider the audacity, the profound self-exaltation embedded in each declaration. I will ascend. A direct usurpation of the divine prerogative. I will raise my throne. A rival seat of power in direct opposition to the throne. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, a claim to the very place where divine decrees were issued. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds, a desire to transcend even the natural boundaries set by the Creator. And finally, the most damning of all, I will make myself like the Most High, a direct aspiration to divinity, not through obedience, but through seizure. These were not idle musings. This was a blueprint for revolution, forged in the crucible of his own unchecked pride. It was a covenant he made with himself, a solemn vow to reorder the cosmic hierarchy with himself at its apex. This whisper, though unspoken aloud at first, reverberated through the very core of his being, irrevocably setting his path. From that precise moment, his journey began. No longer was he merely contemplating defiance, he had committed to it. The internal shadow had found its voice, and that voice was a declaration of war against the established order. This wasn't merely a lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, willful act of treason, born from the burden of perfection and the perceived oppression of absolute divine sovereignty. The momentous weight of these 5 "I will" statements cannot be overstated. They represent the definitive break, the point of no return. They transformed Lucifer from the majestic Lightbringer, the Anointed Cherub, into something else entirely. A cosmic revolutionary, an architect of discord. The pristine spiritual atmosphere he once thrived in now became the arena for his grand, self-serving experiment. And from that moment forward, the magnificent Lucifer was on a trajectory that would lead to his ultimate, hidden demotion. With the fateful whisper spoken in the silence of his heart, Lucifer's internal rebellion now demanded external manifestation. He had declared his intent to usurp, but a king cannot rule without subjects. His journey was not a direct frontal assault, but a strategic campaign, a clandestine movement through the wildernesses of the heavenly realms, a painstaking effort to sow seeds of discontent among the loyal celestial hosts. Imagine this not as a physical journey across vast distances, but as a subtle, pervasive lobbying effort, a psychological and spiritual campaign conducted in the subtle currents of the cosmic empire. These wildernesses were perhaps the quieter corners of heaven, the less observed domains, or even the internal landscape of individual angelic minds, susceptible to doubt and suggestion. His method was insidious. He didn't openly declare war. Instead, he began to subtly question the established order, hinting at perceived injustices and subtly challenging the absolute supremacy of the throne. He exploited the very hierarchical structure he sought to dismantle. With his immense wisdom and dazzling charisma, he presented himself not as a rebel, but as an enlightened advocate, perhaps suggesting that the existing system was limiting their potential, that there was a better way to achieve glory, a more just distribution of honor. The challenge he faced was formidable. Could he convince other angels to trust his promises, his vision of a reordered cosmos, more than they trusted the established harmonious order of the Creator? He had to overcome millennia of perfect devotion, unwavering loyalty, and the intrinsic understanding that worship belonged solely to the throne. This was a campaign of whispers and persuasion, leveraging his immense authority and the respect he commanded. He likely did not speak of outright rebellion, but of reform, of empowerment, of a more equitable system where the glory could be shared more broadly, perhaps even hinting that they, too, could ascend above the stars. He painted a picture of freedom from perceived limitations, subtly twisting the desire for excellence into a thirst for unwarranted autonomy. The texts suggest that he succeeded in swaying a significant portion, a third of the stars of heaven. Revelation 12:4. This indicates a sophisticated and highly effective campaign of deception, a testament to his original brilliance and persuasive power. He wasn't merely recruiting. He was engineering a shift in allegiance, corrupting minds that had known only purity. This wilderness journey was a test of his resolve and his cunning. It was here that he demonstrated his capacity for manipulation, turning beings of light towards the shadow of his own ambition. The seeds of discord, once planted in his own heart, were now being broadcast throughout the celestial fields, preparing for a harvest of cosmic division. The silence of his fateful whisper was now slowly giving way to a chorus of discontent, heralding the profound calm that would precede the impending storm. The wilderness journey had concluded. The clandestine campaign of whispers and persuasion, of planting seeds of doubt and ambition, had borne fruit. Lucifer's conspiracy was no longer a solitary thought in a perfect mind. It was a fully formed movement, a shadow faction operating within the radiant halls of the celestial empire. A full third of the angelic hosts, according to the prophetic imagery in the book of Revelation, had secretly pledged their allegiance to this new, charismatic leader. They were swayed by his arguments, captivated by his brilliance, and seduced by the promise of a self-determined glory. This was a silent coup, a seismic shift in loyalty that had occurred beneath the surface of heaven's ceaseless symphony of praise. Imagine the atmosphere in the final moments before the conflict erupted. On the surface, the trade routes of glory still flowed towards the throne. The cities of heaven still hummed with their divine purpose. But beneath it all, an unsettling tension had begun to permeate the spiritual air. The harmony, though still audible, now carried a subtle, dissonant undertone. The air on the Mount of Assembly, the very place Lucifer had vowed to enthrone himself, must have grown thick with an unspoken anticipation. Loyal angels may have sensed a new coolness in their comrades, a subtle shift in their gaze, a reservation where there was once pure, unadulterated devotion. The conspirators, in turn, would have moved with a strained silence, their hearts torn between ancient allegiance and their new secret covenant. This was the calm before the storm, a deceptive stillness, a fragile peace masking a universe on the brink of civil war. It was as if the entirety of creation was holding its breath, sensing the imminent collision of two irreconcilable principles, the absolute sovereignty of the Creator versus the defiant self-exaltation of His most perfect creation. The stage was meticulously set. The players were in position. The lines had been drawn in the secret loyalties of countless hearts. Every glance, every silent moment, every note in the celestial song was now charged with the potential for eruption. The fateful whisper had grown into a silent, unified conspiracy, and all that remained was for the silence to be shattered by the first overt act of war. The heavens waited, poised between an eternity of perfect order and the impending chaos of an unimaginable rebellion. The deceptive calm, the silent tension that had gripped the heavens, could not hold. The moment of confrontation, inevitable from the first fateful whisper, finally arrived. And it was not a debate, a negotiation, or a political summit. It was a cataclysm, a war, a cleansing fire of revelation that exposed the hidden conspiracy for all to see. The Book of Revelation, chapter 12, provides the most direct and visceral account of this cosmic eruption. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. This is not a philosophical disagreement. This is the language of open, declared conflict. And then the unveiling fire blazed. The sky, once a canvas of harmonious light, erupted into a maelstrom of celestial warfare. This was a battle fought not with iron and steel, but with divine power, with light and darkness, with the very essence of being. Imagine brilliant flashes of loyalty clashing against the encroaching shadows of rebellion. The symphony of heaven was shattered, replaced by the deafening roar of cosmic division. On one side stood the dragon, the great Lucifer, now fully revealed in his rebellious ambition, leading his third of the hosts, beings of light now twisted by pride and deception. On the other side stood Michael, whose very name in Hebrew means "who is like God," a direct and resounding challenge to Lucifer's blasphemous claim, "I will make myself like the Most High." Michael's rise was not a grab for power, but a stand for principle. He was the embodiment of loyal opposition to usurpation, the champion of the throne's immutable law. He and his angels did not fight for personal glory, but for the preservation of the divine order. Their every action was a declaration of allegiance to the one true center of the universe. The battle raged across the celestial plains. It was a conflict that would define the very nature of good and evil, loyalty and betrayal for all of eternity. The conspiracy, once nurtured in whispers and shadows, was now dragged into the consuming light of open conflict. There was no more hiding, no more pretense. Every being had to choose a side. Ultimately, Lucifer's forces, fueled by pride and ambition, proved to be no match for the righteous power of unwavering loyalty. They did not prevail, the text states with stark finality. The fire of rebellion, though fierce, could not overcome the eternal flame of divine sovereignty. The dream of a rival throne, of a self-made God, was consumed in the unveiling fire of this great heavenly war. The rebellion was crushed, the conspiracy exposed, and the fate of Lucifer and his followers was irrevocably sealed. The war was over, but the consequences were just beginning to unfold. The celestial firestorm subsided. The thunderous clash of divine power and defiant pride faded, leaving behind a profound, ringing silence. The war was over, the rebellion crushed. For Lucifer, this was not the silence of victory or vindication, but the hollow, deafening silence of absolute defeat. In that silence, he stood vanquished. The radiant being who had once been the pinnacle of creation, the seal of perfection, was now an exposed traitor, a failed revolutionary. The name Lucifer, the morning star, the light bringer, no longer fit. Its brilliance had been extinguished, its meaning corrupted by the very one who bore it. The name had become a monument to a glory that was forever lost. Then came the verdict, swift and absolute: expulsion. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old. He was cast out to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Revelation chapter 12:9. This was not a negotiated exile. It was a violent, ignominious ejection from the realm he had sought to conquer. Imagine the fall, not a graceful descent, but a plummet, a being of light cast down into darkness, stripped of his position, his honor, and his very place within the cosmic order. The internal transformation was as catastrophic as the external one. The splendor that had once fueled his pride was gone, replaced by the bitter shame of failure. The wisdom he had corrupted was now twisted into cunning resentment. In his eyes, where once burned the fire of perfection and divine proximity, now lay only the cold grey ash of his extinguished ambition. This was a profound identity crisis. He was no longer Lucifer, the Anointed Cherub. His very nature had been altered by his choice and his defeat. The being who had defined himself by his own magnificence was now defined by his spectacular failure. The silence that followed the battle was not an empty void. It was filled with the weight of his new reality. He had wagered everything on his own sufficiency and had lost everything in the process. This was the moment of his great unnaming. The title of Lucifer was effectively stripped from him, becoming a historical marker of who he once was, not who he now is. In the quiet aftermath of the thunder, a new identity began to form, one not of his own choosing. It would be an identity forged in the crucible of his defeat, a role assigned to him in the new, fractured reality he had created. The king was dead, and in his place, something else was about to be given a name and a function. The expulsion of the great rebel and his followers was not a quiet affair, noticed only by a few. It was a cosmic event of the highest magnitude, sending shockwaves, the first ripples of a new reality, throughout the entire celestial empire. The silence after the thunder was broken by the collective reaction of the heavenly court to the gaping void left by one of their own. How did the loyal hosts react? The book of Revelation gives us a clue. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, "Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren has been cast down." Revelation 12:10. The immediate reaction was not one of confusion, but of triumphant proclamation. It was a reaffirmation of the very principle Lucifer had sought to overthrow, the absolute sovereignty and righteousness of the throne. Yet, beneath this triumphant declaration, there must have been a profound and complex mixture of emotions. There would have been sorrow for the loss of brothers, for the fall of one so magnificent, a lament for the perfection that was now irrevocably fractured. There would also have been a holy fear, a renewed and sober understanding of the consequences of pride and the non-negotiable nature of divine law. The rebellion served as a stark, eternal object lesson. But most critically, this moment marked the beginning of a new cosmic legal dynamic. Lucifer, the fallen king, was immediately recast. His identity was not left in a vacuum. A new role, a new function was now attributed to him. He was no longer the Anointed Cherub, but the accuser of our brethren. This is a pivotal shift. His rebellion, born of a desire to elevate his own throne, ironically resulted in him being given a new, subordinate and malevolent job. He was not annihilated, he was repurposed. His prideful ambition to be like the Most High was twisted into a new official capacity. To stand before the throne, he failed to usurp and to level accusations. This was not a promotion, it was a profound and humiliating demotion. He went from being a prime minister in the celestial government to being a prosecuting attorney in the cosmic courtroom, a functionary whose very role was a constant reminder of his failed coup. He was now permitted, within certain divine boundaries, to operate in this new capacity. The first ripples of his fall were not just the emotional aftershocks, but the establishment of a new legal framework, a new order in which the fallen Lightbringer would now play a defined, diminished, and derogatory part. His name was no longer his own. His new title would be defined by his function. We now arrive at the heart of our investigation. For millennia, the names Lucifer and Satan have been used interchangeably, blurring a crucial distinction that lies hidden in the very etymology of the words themselves. To decode the signs of this cosmic demotion, we must become linguistic archaeologists, digging down to the bedrock of the original languages. First, let us re-examine Lucifer. As we've established, this is a Latin name, a translation of the Hebrew Helel ben Shahar, found in Isaiah 14. Helel means shining one or morning star. It is a proper noun, a name, a royal title imbued with majesty and brilliance. It speaks of an inherent identity, a state of being. Lucifer was the light bringer. This was his essence, his name, his regal designation within the celestial court. It was a title of honor, signifying his original exalted position. Now, let us turn our scholarly attention to Satan. In the vast majority of its Old Testament appearances, the word is not Satan as a proper name, but Ha-Satan. The prefix Ha is the definite article in Hebrew, equivalent to the. Therefore, Ha-Satan does not mean Satan, it means the Satan. The word Satan itself is not a name, but a common noun derived from a verb root meaning to oppose, to obstruct, or, in a legal context, to accuse. This is a profound and critical distinction. Hey Satan is a job title. It designates a function, a role, a specific office. It describes what a being does, not who he is. A parallel in modern English might be the difference between John and the prosecutor. One is a name, the other is a role John might perform. Consider the appearance of Ha-Satan in the book of Job. He appears among the sons of God, Bene Ha-Elohim, who come to present themselves before the Lord. He is not presented as an independent renegade king, but as a member of the divine council, a functionary with a recognized, if malevolent, role. When God asks him, "From where do you come?" he replies, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." This is the language of an official on patrol, an inspector making his rounds. His function is to act as an adversary, to test the integrity of humanity. This is the very signpost of the hidden demotion. The majestic king named Lucifer, who sought to establish his own throne, was stripped of his royal identity. In his place, he was assigned a new, diminished role, the accuser. The adversary. His grand ambition to be a god resulted in him becoming a cosmic bureaucrat, a celestial prosecutor, operating under the sovereign permission of the very God he sought to overthrow. His name, a symbol of glory, was supplanted by a title, a symbol of his new, subordinate function. The linguistic evidence is the first, crucial piece of the puzzle, revealing not just a fall from grace, but a formal, functional demotion. Our investigation into this cosmic demotion does not end with the canonical texts of the Bible. To fully grasp the ancient understanding of this adversarial role, we must turn to a forgotten witness, a text that, while not included in the final biblical canon, provides a fascinating and corroborating perspective. We must consult the Book of Jubilees. Written in the 2nd century BCE, the Book of Jubilees retells the stories of Genesis and Exodus, but with additional details and a unique theological framework. It was a highly regarded text in its time, and fragments were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, confirming its ancient origins and importance within certain Jewish communities. Within its pages we find another name, another title for the entity tasked with this adversarial role. According to Jubilees, after the Great Flood, as Noah's descendants began to repopulate the earth, the malevolent spirits of the fallen angels, the Watchers, began to lead mankind astray. Noah prayed for God to imprison these destructive spirits. God consented to imprison 90% of them, but the chief of these spirits came forward and made a petition. This chief spirit is not called Satan, he is called Mastema. The name Mastema derives from the Hebrew root mastim, meaning hostility, enmity, or persecution. It is, once again, a title describing a function. In chapter 10 of Jubilees, Mastema says to God, "Lord, Creator, let some of them remain before me, and let them listen to me and do everything that I tell them, because if some of them are not left for me, I shall not be able to exercise the authority of my will among the sons of men." His request is specific. He asks for 1/10 of the spirits to remain with him to corrupt and lead astray before God's final judgment. And astonishingly, the text states that God grants this request. Mastema is officially permitted to continue his work of hostility and accusation, operating within divinely sanctioned boundaries. This account from a forgotten witness provides a powerful parallel to the role of Hey Satan in the book of Job. It portrays the adversary not as a rogue king acting in total independence, but as a permitted functionary, a chief of a malevolent bureaucracy who literally has to ask for permission to carry out his duties. The Book of Jubilees, therefore, serves as a crucial piece of corroborating evidence. It reveals that the concept of a chief adversary operating in a permitted functional role was a known theological concept in ancient Judaism. Mastema and Ha-Satan are two different titles for the same job description, the official permitted adversary of humanity. This forgotten witness strengthens the case immeasurably. Lucifer's demotion was not just a fall from grace, but a formal reassignment to the office of the Accuser, a role so well defined that it had its own specific titles and parameters within the divine council. His job title had been formalized. We have followed the linguistic trail, consulted a forgotten witness, and established the functional demotion of a celestial being. Now, we must pull on a thread that runs through the entire cosmic narrative, a thread that reveals not just a demotion, but a breathtaking and profound divine reversal. This is the moment where the pieces click into place, the aha of our investigation. Let us assemble the facts. In the beginning, we have Lucifer, a celestial being of the highest order, an anointed cherub, a kingly figure created from light and spirit. Possessing immense power, beauty, and wisdom, he rebels out of pride. The consequence? He is cast down, stripped of his regal name, and demoted to the functional role of Satan, the Accuser. A spiritual being is reduced to a malevolent but permitted legal functionary. Now, consider the parallel story, the counter-narrative that begins almost immediately after. We have Adam, a terrestrial being, a creature formed not from celestial fire, but from the humble dust of the earth. He is given dominion, a kingly role over the earthly realm. He is also given a priestly function to work and keep the garden, language that echoes the duties of the Levitical priests in the tabernacle. He is a king-priest made of clay. Through the deception of the very entity who had been demoted, Adam falls. He loses his dominion and is exiled from his place of authority. The demoted king successfully orchestrates the fall of the newly minted one. But the story does not end there. This is where the cosmic thread reveals its magnificent pattern. The entire arc of biblical history becomes a narrative about the restoration and elevation of humanity. God's plan is not merely to restore Adam to his original state, but to elevate humanity to a position far beyond what was lost. And this culminates in the arrival of the last Adam, Jesus Christ. He is the ultimate man of dust, who lives a perfect life, defeats the accuser's temptations, and through his death and resurrection reclaims the lost dominion. But his ascension is not just a return to the garden. Colossians and Ephesians tell us he was raised far above all principality and power and might and dominion, and that believers are seated with him in the heavenly places. And here is the cosmic thread, the great reversal made plain. Lucifer, the mighty angelic being, was demoted from king to accuser. In stark contrast, humanity, the humble being of clay, is destined to be elevated from dust to a royal priesthood, seated in authority at a level even higher than Lucifer's original station. This is not a coincidence. It is a divine checkmate. God's answer to the pride of the highest angel was not simply to destroy him, but to elevate the lowest of his intelligent creations, humanity, to a position of glory that the original rebel could never have imagined. The demotion of Lucifer is not a standalone event. It is the dark backdrop against which the glorious promotion of redeemed humanity is displayed. It is the most profound and audacious status reversal in the history of the cosmos. Once we understand that Lucifer's demotion resulted in the functional role of Satan, the accuser, a distinct and recurring pattern begins to emerge throughout the sacred texts. His primary strategy, his modus operandi, is no longer that of a rival king trying to build a separate kingdom. Instead, he consistently operates within his assigned, demoted function. He accuses, he tests, and he tempts, always within the boundaries of divine permission. The Book of Job is our foundational case study. Here, Satan is not leading a celestial army. He is fulfilling his role in the divine council. He doesn't act unilaterally. He presents a legal challenge against Job's integrity, and he must receive explicit permission from God for every escalating test he performs. Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger, God commands. This is not the language of a sovereign rival. This is the language of a subordinate being given a strict and limited mandate. Now, let's fast forward to the New Testament and observe the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. The pattern repeats. The accuser comes to test the last Adam. His temptations are legalistic and procedural. He quotes scripture, attempting to trap Jesus within the framework of the law. He offers Jesus the kingdoms of the world, not because he possesses them by inherent right, but because, as the ruler of this world, a title reflecting the dominion forfeited by Adam, he has temporary, permitted authority to make such an offer. Jesus' victory is not a military one, but a legal one, defeating the accuser's challenges with the authoritative word of God. This pattern reaches its ultimate expression in the book of Revelation, where he is explicitly given the title that defines his entire post-rebellion existence. The accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night. Revelation 12:10. This is his primary function, his celestial occupation. It's a relentless, around-the-clock campaign of accusation, a constant effort to prove humanity unworthy, to highlight every flaw and sin before the throne of God. From Job to Jesus to the final cosmic conflict, the strategy is consistent. He is not building a parallel heaven. He is operating as a prosecuting attorney, relentlessly attempting to leverage the law to condemn God's creation. His demoted job title has become his primary weapon. Recognizing this recurring pattern is crucial. It changes our understanding of the enemy from a chaotic force of pure destruction to a legalistic adversary who operates within a specific, predictable, and ultimately limited framework. His power lies not in brute force, but in accusation, and that very function is the eternal brand of his cosmic demotion. With the linguistic evidence, corroborating texts, and the recurring pattern so clearly laid out, a pressing question emerges. Why is this understanding not more widespread? Why has this cosmic demotion, this functional shift from Lucifer the king to Satan the accuser, become a buried legacy, obscured by a more monolithic and simplistic view of the adversary? The reasons are complex, rooted in human psychology, theological simplification, and the very nature of storytelling itself. Firstly, it is far easier and arguably far more terrifying to conceive of the enemy as a singular, all-powerful dark god. a cosmic sovereign of evil who acts with absolute autonomy. This narrative fits neatly into a dualistic worldview, a simple story of light versus dark, good versus evil. It creates a clear, unambiguous antagonist, a figure upon whom all fear and blame can be projected. To accept the demotion, however, requires a much more nuanced and sophisticated theological framework. To acknowledge that our primary adversary is, in fact, a demoted official, a cosmic functionary operating under the sovereign permission of God, is a far more challenging concept. It demands a profound level of trust in God's ultimate control, a faith that even the most malevolent accusations and trials are, in some mysterious way, contained within His overarching plan. For many, this level of trust in divine sovereignty is difficult to grasp, and it is simpler to imagine a universe where God and Satan are two opposing kings locked in a cosmic chess match. Furthermore, over centuries of religious tradition, art and literature, from Dante's Inferno to Milton's Paradise Lost, the image of Satan as the absolute monarch of hell has been powerfully solidified in our collective cultural consciousness. These epic narratives, while brilliant, often conflate the distinct biblical roles, popularizing a simplified mythological figure over the more complex, legalistic entity presented in the texts. The dramatic image of a fallen king ruling a fiery domain is far more compelling than the intricate reality of a celestial prosecutor bound by cosmic law. Finally, perhaps the legacy was buried because understanding it fundamentally changes the nature of our spiritual battle. If we are fighting a dark king, our response is one of fear and dread. But if we are facing a prosecuting attorney, our response shifts. We no longer need to cower, we need to consult our defense attorney. This truth shifts the focus from the power of the enemy to the power of our advocate. A theological reorientation that diminishes the fear-based power the adversary holds over many believers. The buried legacy of the demotion is a truth that, once uncovered, radically empowers the believer and diminishes the perceived power of the accuser. This investigation into an ancient cosmic demotion is not merely a sterile academic exercise or a dive into obscure theological history. It is a truth that echoes powerfully into the present moment, directly impacting the internal spiritual battles that every human being faces. The functional shift from a rebellious king to a permitted accuser has defined the very nature of spiritual warfare as we experience it today. The primary battlefield is not external. It is the courtroom of your own mind, the sacred space of your conscience. And the primary weapon wielded against you is not a legion of demons in a physical assault, but the incessant whispering voice of accusation. This is the echo of Satan's demotion, his primary role played out on the stage of your daily life. Consider the internal voices that plague you. The voice that replays your past mistakes on a loop, insisting you are defined by them. The voice that magnifies your flaws and weaknesses, telling you that you are unworthy of love, forgiveness, or success. The voice that compares you relentlessly to others, highlighting all the ways you fall short. The voice that whispers words of shame, guilt, and condemnation, seeking to paralyze you with a sense of utter hopelessness. This is not random negativity. This is a strategy. This is the echo of the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night. Having failed to usurp the throne, his demoted function is now to convince you, a bearer of the divine image, to agree with his accusations. His goal is to make you your own prosecutor, to get you to believe the case he presents against you in the court of your own heart. When you feel the weight of condemnation pressing down on you, when you feel disqualified by your imperfections, you are hearing the echo of this ancient functional role. The spiritual conflict we are engaged in is fundamentally a legal one. It is a battle over your identity and your legal standing. The accuser presents evidence, often based on real failures, to argue for your condemnation. Understanding this changes everything. It reframes our internal struggles. We are not fighting a chaotic, unpredictable monster. We are facing a predictable legal opponent whose entire case is built on accusation. This knowledge is the first step toward dismantling his power. The echo of his demotion is the constant hum of condemnation in the background of our lives, and learning to identify that sound for what it is, the voice of a defeated and demoted official, is the beginning of our liberation. The grand cosmic story of Lucifer's fall and his subsequent demotion to the role of the accuser is more than just a piece of hidden history. It is a sacred mirror held up to our own souls. In its reflection, we are forced to confront a profound and deeply personal question. In the daily legal proceedings of my own life, in my interactions with others, and my internal dialogue with myself, which role am I playing? This knowledge creates a stark, unavoidable choice. When you look at the flaws and failures of a colleague, a family member, or a friend, do you instinctively gather evidence against them? Do you internally list their shortcomings, rehearse their mistakes, and build a case for their unworthiness in the courtroom of your mind? Do you find a subtle satisfaction in their stumbles, as if it validates your own standing? In those moments, whether you speak it aloud or not, you are acting as a Satan, an accuser. You are stepping into the functional role of the demoted one. And what about the voice within? When you fail, when you fall short of your own standards or the standards of others, do you stand before the mirror of your conscience and become your own prosecutor? Do you present the evidence of your inadequacy with a prosecutor's zeal, agreeing with every whisper of condemnation that tells you that you are a fraud, that you are unforgivable, that you are permanently disqualified? When you do this, you are not merely being self-critical, you are siding with the accuser, doing his work for him within the temple of your own spirit. This sacred mirror forces us to see this pattern, but it also reflects another possibility. The New Testament presents a radical alternative to the role of the accuser. In 1 John 2:1, it states, "But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous." Here is the opposing role. While the accuser stands pointing his finger, the advocate stands in our defense. While Satan presents the case for our condemnation based on our actions, our advocate, our defense attorney, presents the case for our acquittal based on his. The story of Lucifer's demotion is therefore not just about him, it's about us. It forces us to examine our own hearts. Are we participants in the ministry of accusation against others and ourselves? Or are we aligning ourselves with the ministry of advocacy, of grace, of intercession? The reflection in the sacred mirror is clear. Two legal roles are being played out in the universe. Which one have you chosen? You have journeyed with me through the annals of cosmic history, from the pristine atmosphere of the celestial empire to the smoky aftermath of a heavenly war. You have decoded the linguistic signs, listened to the forgotten witnesses, and seen the recurring pattern of a demoted official. You now understand that the primary weapon of our adversary is not sheer force, but the persistent, legalistic voice of accusation. This knowledge is not passive. It brings you to a crossroads, a fundamental point of decision that will redefine how you engage in your own spiritual life. Before, you may have fought your internal battles with the weapons of self-improvement, willpower, and endless self-justification. When the voice of condemnation whispered of your failures, you fought back by trying to be better, by promising to do more, by arguing that your good deeds outweighed your bad. In essence, you stepped into the courtroom and attempted to be your own defense attorney, arguing your case based on your own merit. But as you have likely discovered, this is an exhausting and ultimately losing battle. The accuser always has more evidence. Now, with this new understanding, you stand at a crossroads. One path leads back to the familiar struggle, the wearying cycle of self-defense and inevitable failure. It is the path of trying to prove the accuser wrong by your own strength. But the other path is one of radical trust and strategic realignment. This path acknowledges that you cannot win the case on your own merits. This path accepts that the accuser is, in fact, correct about your guilt under the law. And then it makes a profound choice: to cease self-defense and to rest entirely in the defense provided by your appointed advocate. This is the crossroads of choice. Will you continue to engage the accuser on his own terms, trying to debate your own righteousness? Or will you, upon hearing the accusation, simply turn the matter over to your counsel, to the one whose blood speaks a better word than any accusation? Knowing that the enemy's chief weapon is accusation renders your personal efforts at self-defense obsolete. You cannot fight a legal charge with good intentions. You can only fight it with a superior legal defense. The choice is clear. Continue the futile effort to justify yourself, forever trapped in the accuser's courtroom drama. Or place your trust in the finished work of Christ, the advocate who has already silenced every charge, disarmed the prosecutor, and rendered every accusation null and void at the cross. Your new knowledge demands a new strategy. You are no longer a defendant scrambling for evidence. You are a client at rest, whose lawyer has already won the case. Which role will you choose to play? We have reached the end of this particular investigation, but in truth, we have only just scratched the surface. We have traced the hidden demotion of Lucifer the king to his functional role as Satan the accuser. But this revelation is not a destination, it is a doorway. It is an invitation into a deeper, more profound understanding of the unseen realm and the cosmic drama that underpins our very existence. The truth of the accuser's limited functional role is just one thread in a much larger tapestry. What other roles have been assigned to celestial beings? What are the specific functions and jurisdictions of the loyal angels within the divine council? How does the cosmic courtroom truly operate? And what other forgotten witnesses and buried legacies are waiting to be unearthed from ancient texts? This is not a journey for the passive observer. It is for the seeker, the scholar, the one who is not content with simplistic answers and inherited assumptions. It is for the soul who hears the echo of a deeper truth and is brave enough to follow it, even when it challenges long-held beliefs. If what you have heard today resonates within your spirit, then consider this your formal invitation. This channel is not a pulpit. It is a research hub, a community of fellow investigators dedicated to peeling back the layers of tradition to rediscover the profound and often startling truths embedded in the ancient texts. Our inquiry into the transformation of the enemy's identity is merely the beginning. There are more secrets to uncover regarding the roles and functions of the various entities within the heavenly council. There are deeper connections to be made, more cosmic threads to be pulled. Therefore, I invite you to join this community. Subscribe, engage, and share what you have discovered in your own studies. Bring your questions, your insights, and your hunger for truth. Let us be a collective of explorers, charting the intricate maps of the spiritual world together. Be ready, for the journey ahead will take us into even more mysterious and illuminating territories. The call to the depths has been answered for today, but the vast ocean of divine mystery still awaits. The next investigation is already beginning.